Today we will be talking about formal versus informal writing. Formal writing and informal writing are the two main styles of writing. Writing is the way we put together words on a page to say what we need to say. Different situations mean different ways of putting words together. There should be a big difference in the way we might write to our friends and the way we might write to the president. Both are okay, but different situations call for different styles. Informal writing is a casual, easy style of writing that is appropriate when writing an email, letter, or text message to a friend, or maybe when you are writing in your journal. Formal writing is used when we need to sound respectful, professional, and smart. It is important to use formal writing when you are writing a letter to an important person, a paper to turn into your teacher, or an application to get into college someday. Here is an example of a paragraph written in both styles. Which of these two writings is formal? Which is informal? Very good. Let's look closer. What are the differences between these two writings? Let's circle them. Two of the differences have to do with contractions, two of them have to do with capitalization, and the last two have to do with simplified spellings, or what we call text talk. With a little more information about contractions, capitalization, and text talk, you will all have a better understanding of how to make your formal writing different from your informal writing. Let's start with contractions. A contraction is a shortened version of the written and spoken forms of a word, syllable, or word group created by the omission of an internal letter when written. Now let's practice changing contractions into their original form. Aren't is short for are not. Can't becomes cannot. Couldn't is could not. Didn't is short for did not. Doesn't is short for does not. Don't becomes do not. Hadn't means had not. Haven't is have not. He'll is he will. And he becomes he is or he has. Using these original forms can guarantee that your writing will sound more formal. So, when is it appropriate to use contractions in formal writing? You don't have to avoid contractions in all your writing. Many style guides even recommend using contractions. The Chicago Manual of Style says, most types of writing benefit from the use of contractions. If used thoughtfully, contractions in prose sound natural and relaxed and make reading more enjoyable. Brian Garner's Modern American Usage advises, the common fear is that using contractions can make the writing seem breezy. For most of us, though, that risk is nil. What you gain should be a relaxed sincerity, not breeziness. However, you want to be careful about ambiguity when using contractions. Some contractions are ambiguous. For example, when you read the dogs, it might be a possessive, as in the dog's tail. It might be a contraction of the dog is, or it might be a contraction of the dog has. Usually, the rest of the sentence will make it clear what you mean, but not always, so it's worth keeping the ambiguity in mind. For example, the sentence, I'd never run that fast, could mean, I had never run that fast, or I would never run that fast. Maybe the context will make it clear, but why not make it easier on the reader by reading out, I had or I would. Just don't overdo it. In short, it is okay to use contractions in formal writing if it will sound stranger to avoid them than to use them. If you use any and all contractions just because you're allowed to, you risk sounding awkward and distracting to your readers and possibly too informal, instead of making your writing easier to read. Making writing easier to read is the whole point of using contractions in the first place. It is up to you to decide if you want to be easy and casual or formal. When in doubt, don't use them if they put formality at risk or cause ambiguity and confusion. Now let's talk about capitalization. First, we will look at capitalization and discuss why it is an important part of formal language. Capitalization is one of the fundamental parts of formal language. Knowing how to properly use capitalization demonstrates that you know a thing or two about formal language. The first rule of capitalization is that the first word of every sentence should be capitalized. Let us find the first letter of each sentence in the following story. I is the first letter in the first sentence. I walked my dog, so I should be capitalized. We once, after, and then should also be capitalized because they are the first word in each of the following sentences. The next important rule of capitalization is to always capitalize proper nouns. Proper nouns are just like nouns, except they are special types of nouns. They are the nouns that represent people's names, places, groups, and organizations. Let us look at some examples. Do nouns have to be proper to be capitalized? Yes, but there's an exception to this rule, which leads us to our next rule of capitalization. Nouns that show relationships should be capitalized when they are a substitute for a proper noun. Let's look at some examples. I'm going to see Grandma today. Grandma is capitalized because the noun grandma is a substitute for the name of the speaker's grandmother. Now let's look at a similar example in which grandma should not be capitalized. In the second example, grandma is not capitalized because in this sentence she is not using grandma to represent her name. So, going back to our original question, nouns can be capitalized but only when they are standing in for a proper noun. Our next capitalization rule is that acronyms should be capitalized. Acronyms are words formed from the initial letters of other words. Acronyms are capitalized because they are placeholders for proper nouns. Let's look at some examples. In the first example, FBI stands for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or in other words, they stand in place of the proper noun, so they are all capitalized. Here is another example. The next rule is very important in formal writing. The rule is the first, last, and important words and titles should be capitalized. This is important because if you are writing a formal paper, you need to make sure you write your title appropriately. Let's look at some examples. In the first example, the is capitalized because not only is it a part of the title, but it is the first word. If this wasn't a title, Civil War would still be capitalized because it is a proper noun. The second example has the first, last, and important words capitalized. The in Lorax is capitalized because it is part of a book title. And the last title also has the first, last, and important words capitalized. Let us now review the basic rules of capitalization. Rule 1, always capitalize the first word of every sentence. Rule 2, always capitalize proper nouns. Rule 3, always capitalize nouns that are standing in the place of proper nouns. Rule 4, always capitalize acronyms. Rule 5, always capitalize the first, last, and important words in a title. If you can remember these 5 most basic rules of capitalization, your formal writing will definitely improve. Now let's practice. In each sentence, what needs to be capitalized? Let us now look at the corrections and see how you did. Very good. Finally, let's talk about text talk. Text talk, or textese, is what we call the use of abbreviations and simplified spellings that are used commonly in text messages, Twitter posts, emails, instant messages, and other technologies. First, let's talk about text abbreviations. Did you know that in 2011, the Oxford English Dictionary added the text terms LOL, OMG, TMI, FYI, and BFF? Now that these abbreviations are in the dictionary, does it make them okay to use in both formal and informal writing? No, these terms are informal. They are okay to use in informal writing, but you do not want to use them in formal writing, such as a school paper. Why? They're in the dictionary. Because they might make it look like you are too lazy to write a few extra words, and maybe that you don't care enough about what you are writing to write those extra words. The bottom line is, don't use text abbreviations in your formal writing unless you are quoting someone. For example, if you want to quote something your friend said, you don't have to change their words. Now let's talk about simplified spellings of words. These are shortened versions of words that reflect how they sound when we say them out loud. This makes them tricky because we get so used to saying and spelling them, we might forget how they are really spelled. Let's make sure we can remember some of these words in their proper form. Well done! It is good that you remember how to spell these words. It is important that we always spell these words in our formal writing. For one, using the simplified spellings of these words look informal. And secondly, if we make a habit of using these simplified spellings, we may forget how to spell the real words, and then we will never know how to use them properly. Now we know that formal writing requires entire words, not their simplified versions or abbreviations. We have also learned how to be careful with our contractions and to use proper capitalization in order to make sure we can write formally. To wrap up our lesson today, let's practice independently. You have each been given a worksheet. This paragraph on your worksheet is an extreme example of informal writing for you to translate. Focus on the use of contractions, capitalization, and text ease, but think about the other elements of this paragraph that are informal. Get creative and make this paragraph as formal as possible. Hopefully you all know a lot more about formal versus informal writing.